But the Mongol Empire was the largest empire that the world had ever seen in terms of size. You can see there it stretches from China in this general region, Korea, and here parts of Southeast Asia, all the way through Asia, northern part of India, the Middle East, into eastern parts of Europe, into Central Europe. So a huge, vast area, right? That they ruled. All right. So who are the Mongols? So they are nomadic. So they wandered. They wandered in search of food, in search of conquest, looking for various ways to gain some power or more land, obviously. And they ruled an area that probably is a landmass that's not used very often in terms of its name. It's called the steppes. It's typically a flat, dry grassland area, and that is very much how Central Asia is constructed. Like that area is a vast area of flat, dry grassland and extreme temperatures. It's very hot in the summer, super cold in the winter. They have a very different climate than what we would have here. So that's the area that was conducive to them. Right? They could travel over long distances pretty significantly because of the fact that there wasn't a lot of barriers. There wasn't rivers. There weren't any mountain ranges that they had to, negotiate. They could just, travel in a pretty quick way for that time period. It also was a significant trade route. The Silk Road ran right through that general region, and so it was an area that had importance in terms of being able to access and plunder, the trade caravans, the goods, whether it's silk or porcelain or whatever might have been traveling through that area. That was an area that the Mongols, could access wealth through that type of activities. Again, they were nomadic. They were referred to as the Mongols, and they typically were nomadically plundering and conquest. They weren't culturally advanced. They didn't really have any type of organized religion, that was akin to their area. They originally traveled in what were called clans or tribes. They were loosely organized. It's kind of like Greek city-states, right? Sparta and Thebes and Athens were all Greek, but they were separate city-states that functioned on their own, but they had interactions with others, whether it's interaction through trade, interaction through warfare, conflict, that type of thing. The Mongol clans did the same thing. They were kind of different clans throughout. They had different leaderships, different sizes. Some clans might be a couple hundred, some might be more than that, some less. And they basically survived on the domestication of animals. Typically, you're talking horses were primary, but also dogs, sheep, goats were pretty prevalent in that region. They had to have animals that could survive that climate. So you're not going to look at anything, other than those types of animals, right? But they use those animals for everything: to eat, to build shelter, and for weapons, all that type of stuff. They totally lived off of what the animals could provide. They even burned the waste from that animals, their dung. They would let it dry and burn it for heat. That's how reliant they were on in terms of domesticating animals. They also lived on horseback. They virtually did everything on horseback. They ate, they slept, they traveled. They were very skilled horsemen. They devised a special stirrup that allowed them to ride without using their hands. They didn't have to hold reins like you would see in like cowboy movies, right? And so these stirrups were allowed. They could communicate with the horse to go faster, to slow down, turn right, turn left, whatever. And that freed them up to be able to use their archers and their bow and arrows for military involvement, right? Matter of fact, they were well known for their military conquests. That was probably their calling card, was their ability to overrun people because of their ability to ride horses at a high rate of speed, but yet accurately shoot arrows and attack, whoever they're going after. You see the picture there kind of represents that, where you see he's riding a horse. He's not holding on to the reins. He's controlling the horse with his stirrups in terms of speed or direction or what have you. After centuries, who knows how long, of loosely organized clans, as I spoke to earlier, one leader, a man by the name of Temujin, I believe it's pronounced, doesn't really matter. But anyways, he was a leader of a specific clan, and he had the notion of unification, that all these Mongols should be unified under one leadership. And he eventually, through time, he's able to accomplish that. He's able to, overrun and take over other clans. He eventually is known by the name of Genghis Khan, or Genghis Khan, which is loosely translated as universal leader. So in other words, the leader of all. And he leads the Mongols for a pretty significant period of time during this time period, where he takes this loosely organized clans and makes them under one huge empire, and he divides them up into certain sections during his rule. Very successful in terms of, he was a brilliant organizer. He assembled his armies into brigades and companies and squads, much like militaries are divided today. They all had different responsibilities in terms of warfare. He was a brilliant strategist. He would use deceiving type of strategies against his foes, his enemies. One thing is he would attack and then retreat, and then to get his enemy to charge after them, and then he would double back and circle back around. That type of stuff that was very effective. And then lastly, he used intimidation, fear. A lot of times, towards the, once they kind of got more organized, they didn't even have to fight. Like the fear of their reputation, their fear of intimidation was all they needed. People would just surrender without causing any, without having any fight back type of thing. Moving on again, under Genghis Khan, he dies in 1227. He only ruled for about 25 years. But still, it's a pretty significant time period. Died due to an illness. He did not die in battle, which you would expect. He died, some historians believe he died of the plague, actually. But there was an illness. Nobody really specifically identified what it was. But for the next 50 years, under various his understudies, most notably his great-grandson, led the largest empire. We showed you the empire on that title slide in terms of size. But for about 50 years, they ruled, pretty extensively. They actually had different variances of rule for up through the 1400s. Not extensively like they did during the 1200s, but they still were around up through the mid 1400s. Under Mongol rule, they were fierce, unyielding fighters. They had showed no mercy. That's that reputation that allowed them sometimes not to even have to fight. But once they overran or conquered a certain area, their rule was relatively peaceful. They rarely imposed any beliefs. They didn't really have a lot to begin with. There's not a lot of culture. They didn't really have a religion. They didn't really have a writing system or anything like that. But they also understood that in order to continue conquering, they need to allow these people to function without any interference. And as long as they paid tribute, paid tax to the hordes, to the different Mongol hordes, they were allowed to pretty much live their life. The same thing the Romans did, the Persians did. That's a common theme with empires that large, is that you don't want to control every aspect of life, because that's all you'll be doing. If you want to continue on conquesting or conquering, you need to allow people to kind of do their thing. As long as they abide by the rules and paid some form of tax, you were pretty much left alone. Matter of fact, toward the latter part of their rule, a lot of the Mongols assimilated into whatever area they were occupying. If they were in China, they became Buddhist and became Chinese through time. if they were in Islamic areas. They became Muslim and, you know, assimilated into Islamic life. If they were in the eastern part of Europe, they may have been Christian or whatever. That era, that time I was speaking to, I was a little bit late on my slide here, but it's called Pax Mongolica, which basically is that time period of law and order through much of Eurasia, which is Asia and Europe combined. You can see the picture there. That's a trade caravan. That was a big part of the Mongol Empire. It's how they got most of their wealth and tribute was from traders. And as long as those traders gave them a certain percentage of their wealth, they were left alone. And not only were they left alone, they were protected by the Mongols. So anybody else who tried to maybe overrun these trade caravans that mostly came from parts of China carrying silk and other things, they were protected, as well as missionaries who were moving from Europe into China. They were protected. So anybody who traveled were pretty much given safe passage. The Mongols in China. A lot of people of Asian descent, especially Chinese descent, have a certain amount of Mongol blood in them because of this time period. Genghis Khan never saw the conquering of China, but his grandson, Kublai Khan, did. 1279, he successfully, and is the only foreign power ever to occupy China in terms of the whole dynasty of China. Like they were named as a dynasty, the Yuan dynasty, which basically was when the Mongols occupied China. They were not welcomed by the Chinese. They were tolerated for the most part. And basically it was kind of like that, you know, that uncle or that relative that nobody likes, but they come over during the holidays. You're like, you know, oh geez, we gotta be nice to him and let him kind of do the thing, but we can't wait till he leaves, type of situation. And that's what kind of happened with the Mongols. Under Mongol rules, I mentioned trade flourished, especially from China into parts of the Middle East and Europe. The three major goods that traveled from China into those areas was silk. We talk about Silk Road, right? Porcelain, which is China. You probably ate off China plates during Thanksgiving. You know, your mom takes those out, you know, once a year or whatever. And then gunpowder, which was pretty significant as well. Those were all Chinese innovations. And then Christian missionaries, you know, were the opposite of that. They were from Europe into China, not welcomed by the Chinese. The Chinese were very ethnocentric. They did not want any foreign investments, any foreign occupation, especially from a religious standpoint. Now you're infringing on Chinese culture. China is predominantly a Buddhist territory, and they did not have any appreciation for Christian missionaries coming in and trying to convert people, because that was just not a thing for them. So that was kind of a negative effect of Mongol rule, was Christian missionaries. Not that the Mongols were Christian, but missionaries from Eastern Europe, most of them Eastern Orthodox, traveled throughout that Silk Road and eventually lands in China. So the decline of the Mongol Empire, remember the fall, decline, that's a gradual process, right? It's not like they were, you know, there was a big battle and they lost and they were over. It was a process that lasted, you know, 50, 100, 150 years. It kind of happens through time, especially and mostly in China. Kublai Khan dies in 1279. His mismanagement, not his, but mismanagement and poor leadership from his followers, his heirs, led to rebellion amongst not only Mongols, but also some rebellion amongst the Chinese, as the empire was not as strong as it once was. And couple that with the fact that many Chinese basically, many Mongols basically became Chinese. They basically assimilated into Chinese culture. They became Buddhist, or as I mentioned before, they might have become Muslim if they were occupying areas in Islamic empires, or Christian if they were in parts of Europe. So by the early 1300s, Mongol rule throughout Asia, China, that general region, all but disappeared. They basically kind of assimilated into whatever area they were. Now, Mongol rule did continue on in parts of Russia, Eastern Russia, for a period of time, up and through the 1400s. And that kind of leads you into your note-taking exercise, which you're going to start here in a little bit. But by the mid to late 1400s, Mongol rule had dissipated. So for almost 200 years of rule at different levels, right? The peak of Mongol rule was the latter part of the 1200s, maybe into the early to mid 1300s. By that time, Mongol rule had kind of lost its prestige. Okay, so at this point now, you've had the video lesson along with this lecture outline. You're going to move into your note-taking exercise, which centers on early Russia. And there's going to be some crossover with the Mongols and the Black Death